How to mix and arrange your beat. This is a question many producers have, and today I'm going to be reacting to a producer named Rio Leyva. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that name. This producer, I believe, produced on Drake's album For All the Dogs, and this is a credible source, of course. So let's go ahead and take a look at his video on mixing and arranging your beats, and I'm just going to go ahead and add my feedback from my perspective and give you additional value on top of the original video. So let's go ahead and get into it right now.
What's good, you guys? Today I'm going to be showing you how I mix and arrange my beats. I know everyone does it a little differently, but hopefully you guys can learn something from this video. I know I'm wearing the same fit as the last video because I filmed both of them today. Other than that, man, it's time to get into it. I made a beat really quick, but I haven't mixed it yet. I just made it so we could use it as an example for this video. Right now, without any mixing or arranging, it sounds like this. Right now we haven't changed the levels of any of the sounds. I just dragged them in and used them. All the drum sounds are from 2023 Stash Kit. If you want to download that, the link will be in the description. It's free.
Let me go ahead and jump in right there. The first thing I noticed is that the beat sounded and felt great. Honestly, it didn't really feel like it needed too much extra. The fact that Rio pointed out that he didn't do any leveling is pretty impressive to me. It sounds like if you turned that up in the middle of a recording studio, let's just say the artist was like, hey, just pull up the beat, let's play it on the big speakers, you know, he would get a really positive reaction just from how it sounds right there. And one thing I like to point out to producers is to not think about mixing whenever you're just composing the beat. You're just in there pouring your emotions out, creating the composition. For the recording artist, don't think about having the prettiest reverb or having the most pristine top end on your hi-hat or making your kick punch the hardest. You know that getting the kick to hit hard is important. You know, make sure you get that feeling there, but don't do too much critical thinking whenever you're in the process of making beats. It's all about the vibe. It's all about the bounce. It's all about getting all that energy and putting it into the instrumental. After that, you can start to level things out and then, of course, start to create your mix.
What you should do is go onto our master and you want to put whatever you use on your master. For me, I just put a limiter and I turn down the attack, release, and sustain. So if we open up a new limiter, it's going to look like this. All we got to do is click limit and then turn down these. But we already got that on there. So now that we have the limiter on, we're just going to select all of our tracks by holding Control and Shift and then dragging down like this. Now I'm going to go over to the mixer and hit Control L. So now all of these are routed to the mixer.
I'm glad Rio pointed out something that I tend to point out to a lot of producers, which is to mix through the limiter as opposed to getting the sound totally balanced and then adding the limiter later. That tends to get sounds poking out that weren't originally poking out. Then you have to essentially do more work after the fact. So let's say you craft the beat, go ahead and put your sounds in the mixer like Rio did, get your levels right, your EQs, you add your pretty reverbs, you change that compressor, you boost here, you cut there, then you add the limiter. Now you're like, wait a minute, I just did all that work. Now I have to go back and rebalance once again. So as opposed to doing all of that, go ahead and place your limiter on your master, then go ahead and put your sounds all across the mixer, then start the process, then start the balance. Let the limiter already be there doing the work. These days I like to use the there's one by Ozone, I believe it's called Maximizer. That's the limiter that I like to use when I'm just limiting beats. As opposed to whenever I'm working on real songs for a recording artist. That's kind of a different beast. I don't want to get too deep into that, but I like to use the guard particle on the master. I also like the maximizer as well. That's pretty much it these days. I don't do too much to the master. I kind of let one limiter do a little bit of work, then another limiter do a little bit more work. That's delving into mixing songs. Right now we're just mixing beats, but I just want to put a little bit of a nugget of information out there just in case you decide to delve into more so the recording, quote unquote recording engineering side of things. But let's go ahead and get back into the video.
tip for if you want to mix things quickly is while you're making the beat, just level the sounds so they sound nice. So for instance, with the 808, usually I'll just turn it up over here, and then if it still needs to be turned up a little more, I might turn it up using this level adjust. So let's see how the 808's hitting. Now usually when I'm making a beat, I'll mix it in the sequencer using these little knobs to save time, but I thought I'd show you guys a little bit of a more in-depth process to try to get it perfect.
And that's another good point that Rio just made there in the video, is while he's making the beat, he's starting to balance things out. Notice he said balance things out. It's not really full mixing. He's essentially going for the feel. Okay, is the 808 jumping out too much? Is the kick punching too hard? Is that snare a little bit too much? Let me go ahead and balance things out. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier about kind of sitting things in their place for feel, not really thinking. He's just feeling his way through the process, and that's the same thing I do. And that's also another reason why when we started this video, I made the point that the beat already sounded good, because he was essentially pre-mixing it in the process, just balancing things out, making it feel good. But now he's doing a more in-depth process, which is something that I like to do too as well. So let's go ahead and get back into the video.
Advice to you guys is just use your ears rather than looking at levels, because even if you mix things pretty quiet and your whole beat is quiet, you can go to the limiter afterwards and turn up the gain over here. So don't worry about your 808 hitting at a certain dB. I know a lot of people will say, oh, have the clap at this dB and the 808 at this dB, but I'd say you just got to use your ears rather than looking at the actual levels of things.
I agree with that point to a certain degree. I like to have my kick sitting at, say, usually around like -8 dB, and I kind of use that as my grounding point. So that way, as I'm adding more sounds, I'm not adding more and more and more and consuming more and more of the headroom of the beat, because it's kind of easy to start chasing your tail because we're dealing with all this information, especially with the hip hop and R&B genres. We just loading it with so much low end information. It's kind of good to have at least one point of reference as kind of like your North Star. So as you're going through the process of mixing, you can kind of tell, okay, where's my clap at? I know my clap is there. Okay, the hi-hat is there. Okay, the shaker is there. I kind of have a somewhat of a guide letting me know when I'm kind of all over the place, or maybe I'm just boosting too much and I'm not noticing that there's a lot of low end information, let's say in a snare, that's causing the entire headroom to get eaten up. And if I have something like, let's just say a clap or a kick as my grounding point or my North Star, so to speak, I can go back and see, okay, this is where the clap is, this is where the strings are, this is where the kick is. Okay, why is the headroom getting eaten up so much? What exactly is going on? What exactly is wrong? So I agree that you don't have to have strong rules when it comes to mixing. It's all about feel. But for me, for my personal process, I like to have at least one point of anchoring myself in the process. And for me, that's typically the kick. And once again, I like it typically around like -8 dB. But once again, that's just me. You can create your own process. I'm just sharing with you my own perspective on that.
To the mixer, I'm gonna go through and mix the sounds one by one. Usually what I do is if I route things to the mixer, I'll solo the melodies and get those at a good level and then go from there. So we're gonna start with some of these melodies. With this melody, there's a little bit too much low end, so what I'm gonna do is select all the melodies using Control Shift and then right click down here on an empty channel and do route to this track only. Now what that's gonna do is now all of these melodies are running through track 17, and if we put any effects like an EQ, it will affect all the melodies at once just to save time. So I'm gonna click.
That's a really good technique that Rio was doing here for his mix. I tend not to create these, we call them essentially buses, especially for like Pro Tools users, and of course all DAWs use buses, but the fact that he's using it so early is different. It's not bad in any sense of the word, it's just different. I never really thought to create a bus for all my melodies so soon to create somewhat of a more cohesive sound between them. But I can't see how this can be useful. So hey, I learned something from this video. This is definitely something that I'm going to personally give a try. I tend to use the buses later. I like to get the individual sounds kind of working together the way I want them to. Even in the mixer, I might even do a little bit of panning of, let's say, a synth a little bit, or a high lead a little bit this way, or maybe a bell I kind of want behind things. But to do it so early, it's just different. But I can see how that can really create your own sound in the process. So shout out to Rio for doing that. And once again, I am going to give this a try myself because it does look interesting.
Twice, or no, 3 times to get to this preset that already has a cut. And now we're going to take out some low end. Usually I'll cut around here, but again, you just want to use your ears rather than following rules, because every beat is going to be different and there isn't one set way for things to be. Now this flute is hitting a little bit too loud, so I'm going to turn that down. And I also want to put some effectrix on this harp. Alright, I like that preset. And like I said, you should base it more off your ears rather than the level that things are hitting at. But usually I have my melodies hitting around here. I just look at the mixer to see where it's hitting. You usually want a little above halfway.
I'm glad Rio pointed out that he's using his ears in the mixing process. That's super important. One mistake that I made whenever I first started was using my eyes, and I would just start cutting and boosting stuff just because I thought I was supposed to. Back in my day, I hate to kind of age myself, but back in my day, all we had was message boards. We didn't have YouTube and all these more credible people where you can actually hear how their music sounds like. Unfortunately, we kind of had to go with how people were talking, and it's really easy to get fooled when you can't listen to somebody's body of work. So thankfully for this new generation, you have people like Rio, you have people like myself, where you can listen to the music and then say, okay, this is a person I actually want to take advice from. So that's a good thing. And another point that Rio made was the fact that he's using his eyes and he's looking at the headroom. So once again, the headroom, that's going to keep you from hitting the master bus too hard, or you don't have enough space for the recording artist to actually, perform and do their thing. If you're just cramming all these sounds into your beat and then you're smacking against the master fader, there's no way to breathe. And unfortunately, I've had that experience recording different artists, getting their YouTube type beats where the producers are just smashing everything against the master bus, and we really don't have any room to have the artist's vocal sit on the beat. And producers, I want you to really pay attention to this, because that can cost you a placement if you're kind of rubbing the engineers the wrong way and giving them more work. Fortunately, these days we have tools like Soothe, which is a resonant suppressor plugin, which makes it a bit easier to get vocals to sit inside of beats, even if they're limited really hard, even if they're smacking against the master fader too hard and just totally clipping in a negative way. But still, please be mindful of your headroom. So shout out to Rio for pointing that out as well.
Unsolo sounds one by one and just level them so they're hitting where I want them to. And usually I'll start with the snare, because one mistake I see a lot of people have is their hi-hats are louder than their snares. I always like to make sure that my hi-hat's a little quieter than my snares. Turn down the hi-hat a little bit. And we'll just bring in the sounds one by one. You gotta base it off your ear. And I also try to just not have one sound be sticking out too much, because if you have one sound sticking out too much, it's too loud. Then when people turn it up on speakers really loud, it's gonna be a little harsh on the ears.
Another great point, if you have sounds that are too loud, and once you turn them up on bigger speakers, especially when artists get into recording studios and you have a frequency that's just irritating all of us, you might not know what's going on, but that can essentially kill the vibe. So one thing I also like to do, I'll just add in, is trying to check your beat in mono. So in FL Studio, of course, we have that knob that you can go ahead and twist to allow you to change your signal from stereo to mono. Once you turn it to mono, you want things to still sound good once they're in mono. You want to make sure and listen, okay, do I have too much reverb? Are my drums do they really feel balanced? Oh, now my hi-hat feels like it's poking out too much. Let me go ahead and take it down like maybe a dB. And then you turn the knob back and make it back stereo. You can kind of tell like, okay, this feels a little bit better. So that's just another technique I wanted to go ahead and add in on top of what Rio said.
And once we have everything leveled in the way that we like, you want to go over to your limiter and turn up this gain until it clips too much, because you want it to sound a little bit crunchy, but not too much to the point where it's distorting in a weird way. So we're just going to turn up this gain knob slowly until it sounds weird. And you want to do this once you've already leveled your beat like we just did. Now that's one way you can mix your beats.
I actually like that sound, a bit of that hard clipping that's happening when the beat gets a little bit too loud. Like Rio pointed out in the video, you want to kind of take it down a little bit so it's not, too harsh. It's a pleasant type of distortion or saturation that's happening. One thing I want to point out is whenever you do start to get things to saturate and clip, in the process that can actually start to mess with your low end a little bit. So I actually created a free FL Studio patcher plugin called FL Bass to alleviate this problem. The 808, as you can hear in the beat, is nice and crunchy and subby, and it's really sitting there in the bass frequencies, but those real low sub frequencies, like if you play like let's just say I like Big X the Plug. If you listen to some of his music and you play it out loud, you're gonna hear those low end subs just go and really take up a whole lot of space in your speakers. And if you're kind of clipping and distorting things a lot, you can kind of lose that super low end. So make sure you go to DesmondASounds.com, get FL Bass, because that patcher plugin that I created allows you to add back in those real low sub frequencies, so you can still be competitive while maintaining that kind of crunchy modern hip-hop trap sound. And on top of that, it has a distortion section in the free patcher plugin, so that way you can make sure everything is still nice and crunchy, and at the same time it gives you that low end sub frequencies that's just gonna take up the whole studio, and that's what you want.
Now that's one way you can mix your beats, but I'm going to show you how you could do it probably 2 times faster, maybe even a little more. So rather than doing all the levels in the mixer, what you can do is you can just mess with these knobs over here in the sequencer while you're making the beat. So when you add in an 808, you want to just turn this up already and maybe boost it a little bit in here using this volume knob if you click on the miscellaneous functions tab. Same with the snares, you might want to turn them up a little bit. That way, if you already have your levels in a place that you like, you might not even have to route them to the mixer, or if you do, you only have to tweak them in little ways, because sometimes we want to have our 808 hitting louder than we can even turn up on here. You just want to make sure, if you're doing it that way, that you don't have your melodies hitting too loud. So if you're doing that, maybe you want to still make sure that your melodies are hitting around where they were when we mixed in here, like around there, because if your melodies are already super high up on the master, your beat is gonna start clipping right away, because you're gonna turn up the 808s and the melodies are already super loud, and it's just gonna be too much going on.
I just want to jump in right here for a second. So Rio mentioned kind of balancing things in the process of creating the beat, or after you're done with the beat, just making sure things are balanced and not having to rely on the mixer for any type of real final tweaks, or if you do, those tweaks are minimal. That's one way to do things, but just to give a little bit of pushback, I would say, just in my personal experience, sometimes it's a bit difficult to really get competitive sounding beats whenever you don't put things in the mixer and really, kind of have those the frequencies and the lights going, and kind of panning this a little bit one way and seeing the lights move. Kind of using let's just say a reverb or a certain type of, let's say the FL Studio soft clipper, or you have like the Valhalla reverb that's giving those real silky reverbs. Personally, I like the process of taking it from the point of creation, moving it to the mixer, and then having that as a separate process of polishing. It's essentially like taking a picture, and then after you're done taking, let's say, pictures with your friends, going back and like doing a little bit of color correcting and tweaking things in a separate process, as opposed to taking pictures with your friends and then saying, hey, let me just color correct as I go a little bit. That's just, this could be a personal thing, but in my experience and what I've seen, it is good to kind of have a bit of a separate process of mixing once you're done creating the beat. Just kind of treat it a bit separate. You don't have to do it in totally separate days, but it could just be like 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, kind of give yourself an ear break, go back and then say, okay, I want to put things in their place just a bit more, sit things in a pocket a bit more. Maybe you need to cut a little bit of the mid-range to have a certain synth, activate a certain kind of way. Maybe you need to take off a bit of low end in a certain string, just so the kick kind of punches a little bit more. So you're just kind of polishing things a bit more in a separate process. So that's just my feedback, just a little bit of pushback. But if you can get things sounding competitive, you may be able to do that. But I would say make sure you A and B your beat against a producer who's just, let's just say, a bit further than you. It can even be a YouTube type beat producer, and say, okay, is what I'm doing competitive? Am I getting close to where that person is? If you can get those results, then hey, who am I to judge?
You might be asking me, why aren't you putting a compressor and an EQ and a million effects on all your drum sounds? I know some people who do that, and it's fine if you want to. In my experience, the engineers are already going to do that when they finish mixing the song. Like, if I get a placement, before it comes out, 9 times out of 10, they're gonna ask me for the stems for the beat. They're gonna go in and load in every single instrument I have, and the engineer is gonna mix it anyways. A lot of the time, if you have really good drum sounds, they're not gonna need all that stuff anyways. So I'd say you just want to get your mix good enough that an artist is gonna use it and the song is gonna sound good, and the extra 10% or 5%, it doesn't really matter. That isn't even your job.
Now, this is something I hear quite a few producers say is get the beat sounding good enough for the artist to write to and kind of catch a vibe, then the engineer is going to mix the final song. I hear that a lot. Now, one thing that I know, working with recording artists, especially in the modern era, is that things are moving so fast and so rapidly that once you send that beat over to the recording artist, I don't care if it's a local artist, I don't care if it's a mid-tier artist who's kind of getting a little bit of buzz, I don't care if it's a major artist, after you're done sending that beat and engineers are placing that beat in Pro Tools and they're recording to it, after they're done recording to it, they're going to be driving or riding around to that song. So one thing I've done as a recording engineer, if you want to call me a recording engineer, as a producer who happens to record, artists are going to take that beat, record a song to it, and just live with the song. And essentially that's going to be etched in their mind as the vision of the final version. And if you've ever watched an interview with different professional recording engineers, they'll use this term demo-itis. Now, what is demo-itis? That means that the artist has gotten addicted to the sound of how the song sounds already, and then the bigger mixing engineer is having to fight with the artist on the more polished professional sound that's going to compete against the big dogs that are out there. And this person might, the fact that you didn't quite maybe get that snare right, they kind of fell in love with it, or the fact that you didn't get your kick right, they kind of fell in love with it. So whenever the engineer gets it polished and really competitive, they're like, okay, this is the final product. Then the artist can feel like, hey, I kind of want the snare to kind of be louder, or I kind of want the hi-hat to be more edgy and distorted. And that's all coming from your part in the supply chain, so to speak, of the song creation process. So me personally, I still like to get my beats a bit more polished. I like to create the beat, feel the vibe, not think at all, and then later down the line, get my beat right, get my levels right. Okay, if I can get that kick kind of kicking a little more, instead of boosting the kick, I like to take a subtractive approach. I'm listening to the beat. I'm like, okay, what sound is playing with that kick that's keeping it from really shining? Oh, that synth is taking up way too much of the mid-range, and all I have to do is open up just a little bit of a pocket with the EQ. Not doing too much, not racking my brain going through 100 different EQs and 100 different compressors. At this point, I have my go-to EQs. I have my go-to compressors. I know what to use on drums. I know what to use on hi-hats. I know what to use on synths if I want them to sound more pretty and pristine. That comes from me practicing month after month, year after year, and then figuring out and really learning my tools to the point that I could do it rapid fire and I could do it quickly. But if I took the approach that, hey, this is not my job, the mixing engineer is going to do that later on their own time, I would have never developed these skills that are translatable whenever I'm working with recording artists, because I know how to balance frequencies and get sounds married together and meshed right in a way that they can leave with a version of the song that actually sounds good, that's actually presentable. So one way of doing it is taking that, balancing it out, and if the vibe is there, the artist can write to it, then it's all good. But another approach, the approach that I tend to try to get producers, especially newer producers, to get to, is get things sounding good. Don't do too much, don't spend a ton of time, but learn how to balance those frequencies. Fall in love with certain EQs. Know how certain compressors sound on your drum bus. What kind of textures. And then from there, over time, you can have a mental toolbox that you just instantly know you can get to. You're rehearsed with them, you've practiced with them, so that way the process isn't taking forever. You instantly know how to get in this EQ, pull out that frequency, boom, I'm done, next beat. And then you can learn to get fast, but you can only get fast through practice. Practice learning your EQs. Do it beat after beat after beat after beat, and eventually you're just gonna get super fast and you won't have to do much thinking.
Making songs and you're engineering too, you might want to go in and perfect it, but a lot of the time that stuff doesn't even help. If your drum sounds are good already, it doesn't need hella effects on them. You just got to get the levels right and make sure that the beat isn't super quiet or super distorted. Next thing we're talking about in this video is arrangement, and it's nice because we already got this beat and it's mixed, so the last thing to do is arranging it. Now I know a lot of people who arrange in a way where they just put more patterns and then they'll make them unique and just make edits to them, but the way I learned is where you click up here and click split channel, and then you select the sounds from here and drag them over. Now I learned something cool from my boy Census, who's also in Internet Money, and that is that if we got our pattern right here and we're gonna split them by channel, you can clone it so that you have one version that stays in the pattern if you want to go in and be able to edit everything. So that way we can split it by channel and bring these in, and if we want to go back to having everything in one pattern, we don't have to copy everything back over. We still have it just in one. But now that we got these down here, which I did by just clicking on the top one, holding shift, and then clicking on the bottom one and dragging it, usually I'll duplicate it over 4 times. So I'll just select it and hit Control B 4 times. The reason why I duplicate it over 4 times is because this section is usually going to be the intro, and then we're going to have a hook that's 2 8-bar sections long, and then a verse that's 2 8-bar sections long. And then once we arrange this, then we can just duplicate it over 2 more times so the beat goes.
I've noticed some producers, like he mentioned in the beginning, kind of keep that one block and just make things unique as you go along in the process of arranging the beat. I started on FL Studio, but I moved to different DAWs like Cubase and Logic, and I've kind of been all around the block when it comes to DAWs. And in the process, I learned to separate my sounds individually, like Rio did here in this video. And then in the process of separating things individually, I learned to name them, so that way I know where everything is and I don't necessarily have to guess. If you have a process whenever you're arranging your beats and you know where everything is, then go ahead and do that. But one thing I want to point out is whenever you have those sounds routed to the mixer, the names in the mixer, that's the names that's going to come out when you track out the beats. And whenever you track out the beats, that's what's the engineer is going to get when it comes down to mixing the final song. And if they have to go through each sound, contact 7, what's another sound here, contact 7 number 2, The rest of them are relatively named, you know, pretty accurately. But if you just have a bunch of generic names, now the engineer has to take time to name each sound. So please just take an extra minute, get in your mixer, name the sounds like kick, snare, synth, low synth, strings, you know, kind of get rid of those generic contact omnisphere type of names, so that way when the engineer is in the process of mixing, he can drag your files out of Pro Tools, get your files and drag them into Pro Tools and actually start the mixing process instead of having to name them in addition to doing that. It's very frustrating. I've been there before. That naming process it's really a headache. So please name your sounds, so that way when it comes down to tracking things out and then putting them in your folder, those stem folders, is really easy for the engineer. So let's get back into the video.
And then once we arrange this, then we can just duplicate it over 2 more times so the beat goes 3 minutes. Sometimes you might have a beat where it just goes straight in, but if you do that, you're still gonna want it over 5 times usually, because that way then they might start on the hook or the verse, but it's still gonna add up to be the same amount of sections. So we're gonna start off with an intro. Just gonna have some of the melody sounds going. Sometimes I'll have my beats drop in halfway through the intro or a quarter of the way through, but it's really just personal preference. You just want to base it off what sounds good to you. For this one, I think I'm going to go with a 8-bar intro. Let's try having the melody for the first part. And when you don't have drums, you can go over to the EQ and create an automation clip and then drag this down so that you still have low end. And then it's just like a puzzle. You want to have it so people don't get tired of the sounds. Now, if you have one sound in your beat that's super catchy, you might have it go for pretty much the whole beat. Other than that, you want to be bringing in and out melodies every once in a while so that people don't get tired of what they're hearing and the beat keeps evolving. So after we have the intro, I'm gonna just delete the flute, I think, and maybe have the harp come in the drop. And also remove the kick.
Yeah, that's a great way to arrange. I'm not really mad at that. I don't know if Rio's gonna touch on this later in the video, but also keep in mind that the final instrument on the beat is the human voice. So you as a producer kind of cooking up in your bedroom or at a studio with fellow producer friends, it's easy to forget that you still have that final element. So I recommend kind of freestyling or kind of mumbling or even rapping lyrics to a different artist on top of that beat. I've even seen some producers drag in acapellas. I don't think that's necessary. You just want to, whenever you're listening, you're kind of rapping to yourself or singing to yourself, just think, okay, do I have enough space? Does it feel a bit crowded? 9 times out of 10, it's just a little bit too crowded. You can mute a sound or two from the entire beat, and that gives the artist extra space. And whenever they have extra space, it's much easier to write to, as opposed to having too many sounds going on at once. So keep that in mind whenever you're arranging your beats. You tend to need to have less sounds than you as the producer think, because the final instrument is the artist.
And a lot of the time, as I'm arranging stuff, I might add little things to the mix. Not as I'm mixing, I'll add to the arrangement. But you know what I mean. As you're making a beat, you're going to hear little things. Like, for instance, I want to add some reverb to this flute, so I'm going to do that right now. And like I said, man, it's just a puzzle. You just gotta treat all of these as little puzzle pieces, and you just gotta piece it together in a way that makes sense to you. A lot of the time, if I have a kick, I might not have it drop in right away, but like I said, there's no specific rules to this, man. You just gotta use your ear. That's the thing that differentiates producers from each other. At this point, everyone can get good sounds, everyone can get VSTs. You just gotta differentiate yourself by how you get yourself out there and market yourself, just how you hear things, little things where someone else might have the kick come in right away. Someone else might start it with the harp in the beginning, but it's just personal preference. And like I was saying with the hook and the verse, right now this is the intro, now this is the hook because it's 2 sections, and this is the verse. A lot of the time in the verse I'll have there maybe be a little break in the drums, it just depends on what type of beat, but in this one I'm gonna try cutting out the 808 for the first 2 bars of that.
That's a really good technique to drop out the kick or 808 in the beginning of that verse. I tend to like to do that on like the second verse, but of course, do what you feel. But I've noticed that artists like really get charged up when you have those drops, and it's usually like a drop in the 808 or the kick. They just start bouncing and going. There's something about that tension and anticipation that comes with taking out a sound that's just constantly going that I've noticed artists just light up, and they just start going, especially if they're freestyling in the studio. Once you do that drop and it's just that the hi-hats are going and it's just that space and that tension, they're anticipating the 808s hitting again, man, that can really spark the mood and really give them a good vibe. So yeah, once again, like Rio said, you don't want your beat to be too redundant and just one thing going the whole time. That's kind of, I can tell when a producer is relatively new to producing, when it's just one thing. Because these beats are almost like a movie. You want highs and lows, you want climaxes, you want anticipation, you want a little bit of mystery, you want a little bit of ear candy, you want things kind of making you feel in the process. So don't have things just going one way the entire time. Once again, doing drops like this is very, very, very useful. So make sure you put that in your toolbox and you do that yourself.
Now, the way I quickly chop things up, like how I just did, is I use the C key on my computer and the P key. If you hover over these different tools, you can see right up there what shortcut it is. If you hover over the cut tool, you can see that when you click C, it will switch to the cut tool, and you can very quickly, like chop something and then hit E to switch to the select tool and then delete things really fast.
Yeah, you definitely want to have those hotkeys in your repertoire, your mental toolbox, so that way you can move much more quickly as opposed to having to go up there and click. As a matter of fact, if you go to DesmondASounds.com, you can get you a free guide that gives you, some useful shortcuts that you can use, and it includes Mac shortcuts. I'm a Mac user, and also Windows shortcuts. So that way you can take a look at that guide as you're cooking up, maybe even print it out, so that way you can start to develop your muscle memory when it comes to those shortcuts and hotkeys. And if you decide you want to record in the future, let's say something like Pro Tools, you'll know how important those hotkeys are, and then you can take that skill set over to that other DAW where you can maybe even start working in commercial recording studios. So great point.
You can also use the scroll wheel, but that's just the way I learned to do things, is by hitting C to switch to the cut tool, and then E to switch to select, and P to switch to the draw tool. Yeah, this one, it's pretty much done arranging. Now that we have intro, a hook, and a verse, we can select everything, and then usually I'll copy it over twice, because if we go over to the end, we can see that that's about 3.5 minutes, but it's up to you. Depending on the beat, you might have it come in right away, you might have a longer intro or shorter intro, but a good rule of thumb is to just have those 5 8-bar sections so that the artist can have a good hook and a verse and a intro or bridge in there, because sometimes if you arrange your beat in a way where it's just switching up randomly, going to different things, like, it can be cool, certain artists will like it, but a lot of the most popular songs do follow a formula. Man, my time's done here. I hope this video helped you guys out, and let me know what other tutorials you want me to do.
Great video by Rio. Just one more thing I wanted to add in about arranging the beat. That was a great point. You want the beat to have variation, but you still want it to be consistent enough to where the artist knows where's the hook. Okay, where's the drop down where I'm supposed to start my verse? Okay, can I add a bridge here? Which a lot of songs don't have bridges these days. You want it to be open enough where the artist can write a song to it, but you also want it to have variety enough where they don't get bored and kind of like, all right, next beat. But you don't want it to be so super random, like you're entering in a beat battle. Sometimes producers who do a whole lot of beat battles kind of start to get into that type of pocket where they just want things to just go crazy and just switch and switch and switch, which is great to impress other producers like myself. I think that's amazing. But when it comes to an actual recording artist, they tend to want things to be nice and arranged. They know where to fit in. They know kind of like, you know, it's like, you know, doing double dutch. Like when you're a kid, back in the days, we used to go outside and we would, you know, sometimes the people would be doing double dutch and I would see people jump in and out. So they want to know when to jump in and get their groove. So it's not that difficult for them to find exactly where they're supposed to fit into the beat. It looks like that's the end of the video. Great video by Rio. Subscribe to him. I'm gonna leave the link to the original video in the description of this video, and you can also get the things like the guides and my FL Studio Patcher plugin that I mentioned in this video in the description. Also, once again, I do appreciate you for checking out this video. My name is Desmond A, and I'm here to help you make better sounding music one video at a time. I'll see you next time. Peace.
Desmond A.